the last several years. We're hiring additional crews, and we're in the process of doing all of that right now.
Redden's customers are upbeat as well.
The market conditions were good. I wanted to catch the rates while they were there.
In fact, mortgage interest rates are around their lowest in about 25 years, so there are more buyers. As a result, developers are building more homes and selling more. The increase in home sales is also good news for the industries that produce everything from lumber to insulation to household appliances. And that should mean even more jobs in the months ahead.
I think the housing sector is going to be the star performer of the economy. I think we're going to continue to see substantial growth in new and existing home sales.
And it's not just housing. At this upscale gift shop in Washington, D.C., owner Elam Safian says people are more willing to part with their money now than they were last year.
I can say simply I've decided to sign a 6-year lease at a new location. I think that that's an indication of how I feel.
Another indication of confidence came from a shopper.
There's a sense of what's the word that's used so much now, hope? There's a sense of hope.
There are indications that the big post-election surge in consumer confidence has largely disappeared, but other economic indicators continue to rise. So that means the economy should continue to grow, though not very fast, in the months ahead. Stephen Ogg, ABC News, Washington.
A spokesman for President Clinton called today's economic figures good news, but worried again about the lack of new jobs being created. Mr. Clinton spent a good deal of his day focused on jobs, how to get people off welfare and into them. Here's ABC's Britt Hume.
Today, the White House said, was Welfare Reform Day. The president, for the 4th time in 3 days, went before his former colleagues, the nation's governors, who administer welfare programs. We must, he told them, end welfare as we know it, by training people on welfare and requiring them to work.
There must be, in my opinion, a time certain beyond which people don't draw a check for doing nothing when they can do something.
Mr. Clinton said that time certain should be 2 years. He also said the tax code should be changed so that taxes don't discourage poor people from working. And he said deadbeat parents should be aggressively pursued. But he does not yet have a plan to do all this, though it was a major campaign topic.
And I want to tell you today that within the next 10 days, I will announce a welfare reform group to work with you.
That group's job, he said, would be to produce a plan within 6 months. Back at the White House, his spokesman was asked why, given Mr. Clinton's emphasis on the issue in his campaign, it would take so long.
Well, he wants to make sure he gets it right, and he wants to make sure that as president, he's leading in the most responsible way.
In the meantime today, the president headed up to Capitol Hill to throw his weight behind a plan that does exist. A bill vetoed by George Bush to require employers to give workers unpaid leave to care for sick or infant relatives. Reporters tried to ask the president about other matters, including the contents of his economic plan to be unveiled later this month.
Look, let's take this one step at a time. I'm just trying to do what I can to help pass this bill this week.
The president may not yet have a welfare reform plan, and the family leave bill may not be his idea. But both issues allow him to appear at least to be on the offensive trying to help average Americans. That's in marked contrast to last week, which he spent on the defensive about his plan to help gays get into the military. Britt Hume, ABC News, the White House.
Republican senators say today they will still try to attach a rider to the family leave bill tomorrow that would extend the ban on homosexuals in the military. Democratic leaders predict the Republicans will fail. In a moment, the other news. The search for jurors in the trial of the policeman accused of beating the motorist Rodney King in Los Angeles. On the American agenda tonight, a way to cure ulcers. It's cheap, it is fast, and most of the time it works. And finally, making sure the mail gets through every day for 64 years.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
through your local MWR programs.
Jury selection begins in Los Angeles tomorrow for the federal civil rights trial of the 4 white police officers accused of beating the black motorist Rodney King. Lawyers on both sides agree it's not going to be easy to find a jury. The jury commissioner sent out notices to about 6,000 people chosen as prospective jurors, and only 380 said they would be willing to serve. It's a dilemma. Here's ABC's Judy Muller.
Among those in court today for pretrial hearings, defendant Lawrence Powell.
How do I feel? Well, here we go again. You know, what did we learn from last year? It's the truth. It's the one, my truth to come out again, and tell it to hopefully a fair jury.
But just finding a jury may be difficult. Attorneys know they cannot find jurors who have no knowledge of what happened after the officers were acquitted last year. The big question this year is whether that knowledge will prevent a juror from being impartial. UCLA law professor Peter Jennings has been following the case.
Tremendous pressure on this jury because of what occurred after the first acquittals. Pressure to find a conviction here to avoid a second riot in Los Angeles.
And then there is the question of race. Although this trial is being held in downtown L.A., attorneys for the police officers argue that it will be difficult to find black jurors who do not have strong feelings about the case.
I think that African-American prospective jurors will be honest, and I think and in that honesty will be that they can't be fair in this particular case.
Black or white, there is concern about the jurors' safety, especially if they should vote for acquittal. In an unusual effort to keep their identities a secret, the judge today ruled that not even the questionnaires filled out by potential jurors will be released to the press. Judy Muller, ABC News, Los Angeles.
Later this evening on Nightline, Ted Koppel will talk with the former police chief Darrell Gates and Congresswoman Maxine Waters about the difficulties of finding an impartial jury. There was a new report today on bias and hatred from the Anti-Defamation League of the Jewish organization B'nai B'rith. Overall, the report says anti-Semitic incidents were down slightly last year in the United States, but not on college campuses. For the 5th year in a row, there was an increase at American colleges and universities, 60 incidents last year. Here's ABC's Walter Rogers.
Deborah Gordon is a junior at Brown, a university with a 30% Jewish enrollment and a reputation as a liberal school. Still, someone wrote "No Jews" on her dormitory door.
The fact that it happened at Brown, I think, is just indicative of the fact that there are people who are anti-Semitic. You know, if it could surface here, it's probably much worse everywhere else.
Every day, Brown freshman Carrie Zucker checks the door of her dorm room. Twice, swastikas have been drawn on it.
This is no joke. Anti-Semitism is no joke, especially on college campuses.
Rarely do authorities catch those who commit hate crimes, making it difficult to understand why these incidents are on the rise. And there's the question of freedom of speech. Last year, when students at the University of Wisconsin displayed a banner depicting a swastika turning into a Star of David, school officials said they had to allow it to stay. At Brown, officials feel public condemnation is the only remedy.
We have to act swiftly, immediately. You have to provide be a role model in speaking against intolerance, but at the same time trying to educate.
While most Jewish students have not been victims of anti-Semitism, many see a growing climate of intolerance.
Because I'm Jewish is no reason to be hateful towards me. I would say, come find out who I am first.
Students fear unless campus incidents are curbed, hate crimes will spread to society as a whole. Walter Rogers, ABC News, Brown University.
There's been another report today on racism, this one from Amnesty International, which says that police in many Western European countries are taking part in violence against blacks, Arabs, and Asians. In other words, minority groups there find themselves attacked by the very people who are supposed to be protecting them. On Wall Street today, the Dow Jones Industrials lost 3.5 points to close at 33.28, and the trading was heavy. There was no progress reported today on efforts to get talks going between striking members of the United Mine Workers and the nation's largest coal producer, the Peabody Coal Company. 7,000 miners went on strike at midnight. The main issue is job security. In our next segment, Israel holds 2 Americans in jail, claiming an American connection to fundamentalist terrorism.
It's because
we can sit here and work with you more. We can personalize it more, and we can talk with you and work with you, and we can take our time with you. Some places are in a hurry just for the sale and get you in and get you out. I like to think that when you come into our store, we can turn around and work together and work on what you can afford and work on what's best for your listening desire.
Today on Profile, we talk to an education counselor in Turkey, discuss child care options, and go skiing. That's Profile at 12:30 and 8 on most AFN stations.
There's a West Point Founders Day dinner for graduates of the U.S. Military Academy and their spouses or guests on March 6th at the Heidelberg Officers and Civilians Club. Make your reservations by February 26th. Call DSN 370-6368.
Serving the U.S. European...
Middle East today, the nearly 400 Palestinians who were deported to Lebanon have voted to reject the Israeli government's offer that some of them come home now and the rest later this year. The Clinton administration believes the Israeli offer means the UN Security Council is now unlikely to try punishing Israel for deporting them. In the Israeli-occupied West Bank today, 2 American citizens of Palestinian descent are being held without charge in an Israeli military prison. Israel accuses them, like the deportees in Lebanon, of having a connection to the militant Islamic movement Hamas. Here's ABC's Dean Reynolds.
An Israeli military court today ordered the 2 Palestinian-American men from Chicago to spend 2 more weeks in jail. 39-year-old Mohammed Salah, a used car salesman, and 36-year-old Mohammed Jarad, a grocery store manager, arrested last week in the Israeli-occupied West Bank and accused of distributing hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash to terrorist groups in the occupied territories. While the government here describes the 2 Chicagoans as agents for the fundamentalist group Hamas, they have not been charged with a crime, nor have they been allowed to see an attorney.
It is believed that the U.S. Hamas activists have been sent by that organization's overseas leadership in the United States in order to renew the Hamas activity.
The Israelis say Muslim extremism here is increasingly directed from the United States, from offices in Arlington, Virginia, Houston, and Southern California, among other places, and that the Americans in custody now came here to rebuild the Hamas infrastructure destroyed by the recent deportations. In Chicago, relatives of the men say they had nothing to do with Hamas.
The Israeli authorities over there, they make their own rules. They fabricate accusations.
While they insist the money in question was donated for charity, Israeli officials say that's not where the money went.
Once this money is channeled here, we find out that it's used not for charity purposes, but rather for purchasing arms and actual killings.
But it will be impossible to know if these allegations are true unless Israel tries, or at least charges, the Americans now being held in prison here. Dean Reynolds, ABC News, Tel Aviv.
To go on to the foreign news now, first by way of introduction, a cautionary note from Washington. President Clinton's choice to head the CIA, James Woolsey, appeared before the Senate Intelligence Committee today. He described the world as an even more dangerous place for the United States than it was in the days of the Soviet Union. We have slain a dragon, he said, but we now live in a jungle filled with a bewildering variety of poisonous snakes. In Bosnia-Herzegovina today, another United Nations relief convoy has come under attack, hit by artillery fire near the city of Mostar. A UN interpreter was killed. The convoy's Danish leader was seriously wounded. In the Bosnian capital, Sarajevo, these are the casualties from the latest attack on a cemetery. Hundreds of Muslim men and women were at a funeral when the cemetery was raked with machine gun fire. 1 person died. In South Africa tonight, there's been another violent battle on the streets of Johannesburg. For the 2nd straight day, police have opened fire to stop a demonstration. A local police captain insists his men acted with restraint. ABC's Don Kladstrup is in Johannesburg.
It not only looked like the old South Africa, but sounded like it. As police clashed with several hundred black drivers who had blockaded downtown Johannesburg with their minibuses. The drivers, whose buses are the primary transportation for black commuters, said they were protesting harassment by traffic police. Riot police, under orders to clear the area, were in no mood to listen. As police opened fire, thousands of commuters fled in panic. 2 people were killed. Many others were wounded.
You fired live ammunition. If this is the sign of the new South Africa, then we're having a damn stupid South Africa.
The government, fearing more violence, has declared the city an unrest area and given police emergency powers to confiscate vehicles and impose curfews. Defiant protesters, who also paralyzed the city yesterday, vowed they would do it again tomorrow. Don Kladstrup, ABC News, Johannesburg.
When we come back, the American Agenda.
Hi, Dad. This looks great, son. I hear you and Zach are planning a bivouac out here tonight.
What do you mean, Dad? We're just camping out.
No, bivouac. We camp out too. But it's a military camp out. Comes from the word night watching, German, stand guard in French. A long time ago, a bivouac was a small group sent out to keep a lookout while the main troops rested.
That's neat. Bet they didn't have a signal flashlight like this one.
No, they didn't have flashlights then, or comic books either.
Too bad.
You know, nowadays, a bivouac is any camp set up without much shelter.
Don't worry, Dad. We'll stand guard out here tonight so you and Mom will be safe from the house.
Okay.
Bivouac, a colorful word from the past and a part of today's military language.
I was just sitting there getting loaded, and I walked into the kitchen and I picked up a knife. I don't know how I did it. I just put it in my arm. I looked down to get another joint, and I noticed blood all over my lap. I had a big cut in my arm. That was the only time I really tried suicide.
If you were not high, would you have tried to commit suicide?
If I would have been sober, I don't think I would have. I really had no control of what I was doing.
I've been a volunteer since the days we beat polio, but this is even more frightening. Over 100 babies die every day. Sometimes we know why, sometimes we don't. That's why we fund all types of research, and why we have programs that teach parents things that will hopefully keep their babies from dying or having birth defects. We just want people to have healthy babies. You want to help?
On the American Agenda tonight, a major development to report on the treatment of ulcers. There's been a lot of rethinking going on lately as to why people get ulcers. For years, we heard it was bad diet, stress, overwork, the boss. While it's true all these things can aggravate an ulcer, they do not actually cause one. But now it appears the cause for the great majority of ulcers has been found, and with it, a quick and inexpensive way to spell relief. Our Agenda reporter's Tim Johnson.
1 in 10 Americans will suffer from ulcers at some time in their lives.
Painful, excruciating pain.
With the knowledge that it's uncomfortable.
The surgeon in the emergency room suggested that maybe I would have to have part of my stomach removed.
And this is what causes their trouble: an erosion in the lining of the stomach or small intestine. The diagnosis of an ulcer usually leads to a lifelong struggle to reduce the stomach acid that makes an ulcer hurt once it is formed. Leah Wilson learned she had ulcers a year and a half ago.
I don't think I'll ever get rid of ulcers. I think I will always have to manage my ulcers.
Treating ulcers is expensive. Leah's medication used to cost $132 a month. But recently she learned the cost had gone up.
Okay, $141.68.
I would love a cure. That would be great. It would be like a new lease on life. It really would.
The hope for a cure may have already been fulfilled. The traditional view of ulcers, a lifetime of pain, cost, inconvenience, is being turned upside down by new and revolutionary evidence that offers a whole new explanation for what causes most ulcers.
The revolution began in 1983 when Dr. Barry Marshall, an Australian gastroenterologist now at the University of Virginia, became convinced that most ulcers are caused not by acids, but by a bacterium. The bacterium is called the Helicobacter pylori, or H. pylori for short. An estimated 1/4 of Americans carry this bacteria. For most people, it sits quietly in the stomach or intestines, but for some unknown reason, it causes ulcers in others. Dr. Marshall predicted that if a bacterium was the cause, the cure for many people might well be antibiotics. He was right. Dr. Marshall has now treated hundreds of patients with 2 weeks of antibiotics costing only $40.
The bacteria are usually sensitive to a combination of antibiotics and stuff called bismuth, which is in drugs like Pepto-Bismol, which you can get over the counter. And so by giving 2 antibiotics and bismuth together, we can cure at least 80%, probably nearly 90% of these bacteria in 2 weeks.
Antibiotics can't cure all ulcers. 20% of ulcers are caused by excessive use of drugs like aspirin, not a bacterium. But there are millions of Americans who may benefit from antibiotic treatment. Case in point, Ann Dunaway. For years, she took expensive anti-acid drugs. 6 years ago, she went to Dr. Marshall, tested positive for bacteria, was treated with antibiotics, and has been free of her ulcers ever since.
Well, I can't believe that I live this life of free of stomach pain and free of heartburn, and I don't have to take the medications.
Dr. Marshall, who points to nearly a dozen studies that have confirmed his discovery, believes that the message to ulcer patients is clear.
If your ulcer is troubling you, you should get out there and look for this new treatment. Find someone who knows about it.
Dr. Marshall's enthusiasm has met with criticism from some ulcer experts, like Dr. Seymour Savison of Rush Presbyterian St. Luke's Medical Center in Chicago.
I think it would be a mistake for us to categorically say that ulcers are caused by a bacteria and to direct patients to find a physician who will use antibiotics to treat their ulcer.
This discovery is so revolutionary that medicine has been slow to embrace it. But as scientific evidence continues to mount and word gets out to ulcer patients, they are likely to vote with their feet for a treatment that is not only inexpensive, but may also be a cure. Dr. Timothy Johnson, ABC News.
American agenda for today. On the agenda tomorrow night, the obstacles President Clinton will face trying to get his environmental agenda, that's his agenda, through Congress. When we come back, 64 years carrying the mail.
Hi, Pumpkin. Want to help me paint this chair for you in the room? Did you have a bad day at school?
No.
It's a move, isn't it?
I don't understand why we have to move. I don't want to leave my friends.
I know, honey, but people in the military have to move around a lot. It's part of Daddy's job. And think of how lonely he'd be if we didn't go with him.
We miss him, too.
You'll make lots of new friends. And you and me and Daddy, well, we'll be together. Isn't that the most important thing?
Yeah. Do you think they'll have a girls' soccer team?
Of course they will. Lots of things are going to be the same. Of course, there'll be new and different things to do, too.
It might be fun.
Of course it will. Now, let me make you a snack, and you can change your clothes and help me paint their chair, okay?
Understand your children's concerns. Explain to them why a PCS move is necessary.
Light fighters, the new light infantry. No matter where you are, in the jungle, the Arctic, the desert, or the mountains, you run out of days before you run out of challenge.
You know, all this talk about building your confidence might sound like a lot of hype. Let me tell you, hype doesn't get you to the top of this rock.
Be all that you can be.
Hey, Gal. What? The elevator's here.
Find your future in the army.
Finally from us this evening, the end of an era. We reckon that the retirement of your local mail carrier only makes headlines if you live in a fairly small place and have a very special relationship with your carrier. That is certainly the case in Raymond, Illinois. When Gus Sutter gave up his route this week, he had spent more years delivering the mail to his Illinois neighbors than anyone anywhere in the United States. ABC's Charlie Murphy paid a visit.
This was Gus Sutter's last day at the post office. He came in early to sort the mail, just as he's done for 64 years. People here don't need a clock. They've got Gus.
About 8:35, you always see him coming down the road. Never fast, just always the same pace.
Gus is 83. He started carrying the mail when he was 19. Coolidge was president, and you could send a letter for 2 cents. He drove a Model T in good weather.
Then in the spring, when the roads got bad, you drove a team of horses to a little mail cart or rode a horse.
He had 130 patrons then, about 150 today. Many are the same families.
This is the 4th generation you brought the mail through here.
He's driven more than 1 million miles in 5 cars. This 80 Olds has 220,000 on it, and only one major failure, a blown head gasket. Gus has had a heart attack, an appendectomy, a hip replacement, and a few encounters with dogs.
Well, I got nipped a couple times. I was even talking to the patron, one nipped me in the butt.
Gus has gone through as many substitute carriers as he has cars, at least 5. Some waited around thinking he would retire and they'd take the job full time, but he outlasted them too. He knows everyone, so delivery is pretty informal.
Mailman!
Although it was his last day, he didn't let sentiment get in the way of government business.
Hi, Pat.
Good night, Gus. God bless you.
Give me the mail out of the box, will you, please?
Sure will.
There was a room full of friends and a cake. If it weren't for his wife's health, he'd keep on going. They thought he was going to retire at 60-year service, but he didn't.
And I also understand that you were scheduled to appear on Johnny Carson's show, and Johnny up and retired on you. Did he?
Yeah, he did. But Gus and that old Olds could just keep on going and going. Charles Murphy, ABC News, Raymond, Illinois.
And that is our report on World News Tonight. I'm Peter Jennings. Nightline later. We'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
This has been a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.
If you're involved in a traffic accident while driving in Turkey, remember these important points. Do not leave the scene of the accident. Don't move the vehicles involved until instructed by the Turkish police. Have someone contact base legal or the security police immediately. Turkish officials will take statements and file the reports, and you may be detained or jailed for accidents involving serious injury or death. A public prosecutor will later determine blame and assess fault. Be prepared. Know the accident reporting procedures in Turkey.